Well, Jake, we sat here the day that we've heard the sad news about your good friend Eddie Jordan's passing. How are you feeling, mate?
Yeah, it's obviously been a really sad day. But the more I kind of think about Eddie, and, you know, I'm not a massive fan of social media, but every time I go onto my Instagram or on X, I'm flooded with people reminding me of tweets I've sent about him, or videos that I've shared of him, or even photos or videos that they've found of him or the two of us together. So actually, I'm actually really enjoying reminiscing now that I've sort of recovered from the initial shock when I got the text from one of his children this morning to say that he'd passed away.
Well, what we thought would be a nice tribute to Eddie is that we reminisce about your experiences of someone that was so close and so important to you. What was the first time you ever met him?
So the first time I ever met Eddie was when I was working on Children's BBC, and it would have been late 2008. And this rumour went round that the BBC had won the rights to Formula One, and I was desperate to be a sports presenter, and I loved F1, so I went and had a few meetings with a guy called Niall, who was a big boss at the BBC, and eventually I got called into a meeting room one day, and Niall Sloan, who was the head of Formula One, and Mark Wilkin, who was brought on board to produce Formula One for the BBC, they both said to me, I'll never forget it, they said, Mr. Wilkin and Mr. Sloan would like to offer you the job as the BBC's Formula One presenter. And I said, well, Mr. Humphrey would be delighted to accept. But then Niall said to me, he said, well, there's one more hurdle to overcome. I need you to come and meet the man that's going to be your pundit in the pit lane. David Coulthard was still racing at the time. Eddie was working in London. And so Niall took me to meet Eddie Jordan at his office in Mayfair in central London. And he basically said to me, Niall, he said, if Eddie likes you, then you'll be fine. If Eddie doesn't, then we might have to rethink who the presenter's going to be. Right. And I walked in, and I'll never forget it. I walked in, and I'd never met Eddie before. And he literally, the minute I walked in, he went, no. You'll have to forgive the Eddie Jordan impressions. No. Too tall, too good looking, too young. Thanks very much. And shut the door of his office. And I didn't know him, so I was like, is that for real? Is that it? Is that the end of the meeting? Of course, he was joking. We went in, we had coffee together, we chatted about his life in Formula One, my life on Children's BBC, and from there on, sort of grew a real blossoming relationship. And that was the first time that I met him, and immediately his spirit and his verve and his lust for life and his energy was absolutely clear.
So in what ways did he look after you then? Because you're making quite a transition there into his world, aren't you? Coming from kids' television into this world that this guy's been immersed in for years.
Yeah, so I was young, Damien. I was only 28 years old when I got the job to move on from Children's BBC to Formula One. And I would say the biggest thing that Eddie gave me was the sort of human touch. I remember he pulled me aside in Australia in 2009, which was the first race that we did together. And he just said, look, so Formula One used to call itself the Piranha Club. He said to me, look, there's a lot of piranhas in here. There's a lot of people in here that will pretend to be your friend, but they'll all be after something. Your job in Formula One is to work out who is your friend and who isn't your friend, and stick with the people that you think are your friends. And if ever you need a hand, let me know. So immediately I had that sense that he was putting his arm around me. You know, like my dad couldn't be in Australia in 2009. My dad couldn't be in China. My dad couldn't be in Singapore or Spa, but Eddie could. And I guess as a guy in his 20s, having been given a job that was overwhelming mentally, you know, I remember my boss on F1 saying everyone will make a decision on whether they like you as their new Formula One presenter within the first 30 seconds. So I felt the pressure. On the day they announced publicly that I was the Formula One host, Harriet rang me at 10:30 in the morning. It was announced at 10 o'clock. She rang me at 10:30 in tears. I said, why are you crying? And she said, I've been on the internet and everyone thinks you're going to be shit. And there was like all of these forums, all these messages, people going, why is this kids TV presenter been given the job of Formula One? So I felt really lonely. I felt like I was swimming against a tide of negativity right at the very beginning. I knew nothing about the world of Formula One. And Eddie said to me very early on, he said, look, I don't know what it takes to be on the telly, and you don't know what it takes to work in Formula One. But I promise you this, if you look after me, I will look after you. And I've felt looked after from day one. And, you know, I stopped working on Formula One in 2012. Yet me and Eddie kept in touch. We he came around for dinner. I went to his for dinner. We kept on talking. I cancelled, took his advice, when I had some challenging times a couple of years ago. He remained a really important figure in my life from that very first meeting.
I remember you telling me a story once where you went out to see him in Monaco when you'd just become a dad.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing with Eddie. Like, I would say joy and chaos are the two things that he brought to my life. Like, I remember Harriet says when she first met him, she came to me, she hadn't met him over the first few races, and it was at Silverstone where she first came. And I introduced Eddie to Harriet. I said, this is Harriet, my wife. And he literally leant into her face and went, I love chaos. And I just thought, wow. And that's how I would describe him. Like chaos. He loved confrontation. He loved chaos. He loved that bit of madness. He loved sort of teetering on the edge. He had a band called Eddie and the Robbers. How many other people have run a Formula One team during the day and then gone and played drums on stage in the evening afterwards? That's how he lived his life. They were called the Robbers, by the way, because that was a nod to the way they used to do business, which he loved joking about. Like, I've robbed this person, I've robbed that person. But yeah, he invited me to go and stay at his house in Monaco once. Florence was newborn. And when you've got a newborn child, like, it's a pretty nerve-wracking time as a parent. We rocked up to his beautiful apartment block in Monaco. And he started showing us around, and he kept saying, you can use this during the day. These are the bedrooms. You can go in there during the day. And I kept thinking to myself, why does he keep saying during the day? Why can't we just stay in the flat that he said I can use for the week? I had no money, right? This was like a free holiday, basically. And then I said, why do you keep saying during the day? And he goes, well. And it turned out someone, an old business contact of his, had basically paid him a load of money to use the flat for the time that we were there. But therefore, that person would need to sleep there. So we'd done a deal with the person that we could use it during the day, but we'd have to sleep somewhere else. So then in the blazing heat of Monaco, with a newborn baby and an anxious wife and a nervous new dad, we started traipsing through the streets of Monaco, and he eventually took us to a tiny one-bedroom flat lived in by a Tour de France cyclist who was away on the Tour de France. But it literally still had cigarette butts in ashtrays on the terrace, pubes in the sink, dirty towels on the floor. And he's like, there you go, right, I'll see you later. And he just left. And I was like, oh my goodness. And Harriet was like, we can't stay here with our newborn baby. And I rang a nearby hotel and I said, is there any chance we could come and stay for the week? And they said, well, it'll be 4,000 euros. And I thought, I haven't got that money. I said, Harriet, it'll be 4,000 euros. And she said, well, we've got no other choice. So I said, okay, yeah, we'll do that, please. And she goes, okay, I just need to take the full balance before you stay. That'll be, for the 5 days, that's 20,000 euros. And I was like, what? You said it was 4. And she goes, oh no, 4,000 euros a night. Yeah. So it was a rather dramatic first holiday, thanks to Eddie. But that was the magic of Eddie, like the fun, mate, that we had doing our Formula One coverage. And I'm really sad today, but whenever I think of the fun things, I laugh my head off.
Like what? Give us some examples of him.
So we always used to try and do fun things ahead of a Formula One race. Like, I think now you see loads of stunts and loads of like big setups on Formula One coverage. And I like to think that really on the BBC from 2009 to 2012, we kind of pioneered that stuff. And someone came up with the great idea that the three of us would wing walk. So we strapped ourselves to these biplanes, 3 different biplanes, flew over Silverstone ahead of the Grand Prix. And Eddie was really quiet, like halfway through. We were meant to be talking and shouting and waving our arms. And I'm like, Eddie's not making much noise. And normally he was the loudest guy in the world. And we landed and he was like, ah. And basically they'd been flying this plane and a bird had flown across and gone straight into his knackers. So at like 200 miles an hour, Eddie had had a bird strike on the Crown Jewels. So you can imagine how he was when we came down. He just used to get things wrong all the time, but I loved that.
Like what? Go on.
Well, we'd be on air, and so what normally, like, you can't hear anything because we wear full earpieces, like full ear defenders, because the cars were so loud. So you could only hear each other by either talking down the microphone or taking out your earpiece. And when we were on air, they faded our mics down when there was like a VT or a film on or something, so we couldn't hear each other. So the only way to talk was to take out our earpieces. And he used to take out his earpiece and he'd go, what are you going to ask me? And I'd tell him the question I was going to ask him. And he'd put his earpiece back in, then we'd stand there for like another 20 seconds and he'd take it back out again and go, what am I going to say? And I'm like, Eddie, mate, I can write the questions, but I can't write the answers. But you just never knew where he was going to go. I mean, one time we got the chance to speak to Paul McCartney.
Right.
And Eddie was great friends with George Harrison. So we did this live interview on the BBC. It was one of my favourite moments. In fact, I saw Eddie for dinner recently and we were laughing about this. So we did this whole interview with Paul McCartney. And as we finished the interview, Eddie just turned to him and we went, "Thank you very much, George." And I'm like, that's... And then they cut to the VT and he looked at me and he went, "Did I say George?" And I was like, yes, because he had George Harrison on his mind. But it was you just never knew what was going to happen with him. I mean, it was only a few years ago, actually, and we can probably play the video that I was walking through central London.
Yeah.
And I just saw this guy busking, and I thought, that looks like Eddie Jordan. And it bloody was. Eddie,
Was it?
He was at Covent Garden. There was not a big crowd. It was nice and quiet. And he was just doing it for a laugh. And I think that's the magic of Eddie. Like, he absolutely lived his life to the full. And as much as I'm like filled with sadness today and reminiscing about the times that we had, that we will never have again, the lesson from him is to live your life to the full, make the most of every minute. And he absolutely did that. And he lived many lives. He lived the life of a kind of young Irish chancer trying to get an opportunity in Formula One and blagging his way and grafting. I remember him telling me he worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep Jordan Grand Prix going. Right. He then lived the life of a person who was fighting with the big boys in Formula One. He lived the life of a Formula One race winner. He lived the life of a beloved pundit. He lived the life of a grandfather, of a father, of a traveller, of a nomad. He travelled the world. He was, he passed away in South Africa. He loved it out there. He just did so much. And I just think if I take on one of the lessons from him for my life, it's just to go and do it, because it's over very quickly.
But when he let you into that world of Formula One alongside him, like his Jordan team was still revered long after they'd even stopped competing. Why do you think that was?
Eddie is not celebrated as the master marketeer and storyteller that he should be. Like, his face always lit up when we were at a race in 2010, a long time after he'd sold his Formula One team, and there was someone in a yellow Jordan jacket, or there was someone waving a Jordan flag or a Jordan cap. And actually, that's a real memory of his. Is like he had such a love for that team. I've got this lovely video on my phone that he sent me on his birthday a few years ago, and he's skiing wearing the yellow Jordan jacket with the balloons flowing behind him. And the reason was because Eddie had a magic ability to connect with people. And if someone says to me, like, what did Eddie do that was so special? It was human connection. I said at the beginning, like, Formula One can be a cold world. There are very few people that I'm still in touch with from that world, but Eddie is absolutely one of them because he was a human being. But the biggest thing was that he brought that rock and roll mentality to Jordan. The fact that he was on the pit lane during the day and on stage in the evening, the fact that anywhere you went, he'd pick up the spoons and start playing, or he'd play the drums. He was like nothing and nobody else. And in some ways, it saddens me that there will never be someone like Eddie Jordan in Formula One ever again, because the sport is now too big. The price of entry is too high. Yeah. You will never get an individual that just loves motorsport and he kind of claws and fights his way to the top table. The sport now is owned by huge car manufacturers or private equity investors. It's not owned by individuals like in the years of Ken Tyrrell and Bruce McLaren and Frank Williams. And Eddie was one of the very last teams owned by an individual. And his spirit was the spirit of that Formula One team. Eddie Jordan's personality is like an extension of life. And that's how he was.
So what do you think he would want his legacy to be?
His legacy, in a Formula One sense, is someone who did it. Someone who won a race. And I remember him talking to David Coulthard and saying he just so desperate to win a Grand Prix. And it finally happened. And the sense of achievement was amazing. I know he would have wanted to win a world title, but that didn't happen. But I think his legacy in the world actually is family first. And if I think of the biggest thing that I've learned from him, it is that it is family first. I remember having dinner at his house with his 4 kids, and they all had partners at the time. I don't think there was any grandchildren around at that time, but Harry and I went for lunch, and honestly, he was never happier than when he was sitting at a big table with all of his kids around. And I remember just watching his happy face, and he was cutting the meat, and he was serving the drinks, and Mickey was there, and Zoe was there, and Kyle was there, and Zach was there, and he just looked so happy, so proud. And I said to Harriet afterwards, I was like, that is it. Like, forget the Formula One race wins for him. Forget the days on the television for me. That is it. Family first is it. And that is absolutely the sort of defining lesson I would take from him.
Were there any other life lessons, or that when you think of Eddie Jordan as a man, that you think, yeah, they're some real bits of wisdom that I can take away?
Yeah. I mean, you know this.
Go on.
This tattoo well. FTB. Fuck the begrudges. And it's something that he has. It's something that his kids have as well. It's a tattoo that basically means don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to the people that tell you can't do it. Don't listen to the people that tell you that your dreams are not dreams that you should believe in, because Eddie is a guy that absolutely lived the dreams that he had. I mean, he'd be the first to come in here now and say, don't mourn me. Don't be sad. I had the time of my life. I enjoyed every minute of it. I won. I lost. And I fucked the begrudges along the way. And so that tattoo that I got in honour of him is something that... and I had a chance to show him that in December. I'm very pleased I did.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because you took that tattoo to the dinner that you had in the final meeting with him in December. What are your memories of that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that meal now is even more poignant because I had no idea that I wouldn't see him again. I definitely thought I would see him again. The last sort of communication with the family that I had was only a couple of days before he died, and I was checking in, and the message was he's had some tough days recently, but the prognosis is about a year and a half.
Right.
So I didn't really know when I had that meal with him that it was the last time I'd see him, but I'm so glad I went. So I was working here with you. I was recording a podcast. I hadn't heard from Eddie for a while. He was struggling with his treatment. He was struggling with his health. And I think his way of dealing with that was just to shut down and put himself first. And I'm absolutely delighted and glad that he did that. But he just sent me a message to say, I've had treatment all day today, but I'm going to have a curry at mine tonight if you can get there at 6:30. And I had something to get home for in Norwich. But I rang Harriet, and being the amazing wife she was, she's like, listen, come on. This is important. And I went, and he'd had his chemotherapy that day, so he was on the 0% Guinnesses. And we had a takeaway curry, and it was so nice, Damien. We just sat, and I suppose the big thing for me is that I thought that time on Formula One was really important for me because it was like a big career highlight. I sort of always thought for him it was just something else that he'd done among his busy life. And I said that to him, and he goes, no, that was the highlight. You know, travelling to LBU and DC and having that fun. I had freedom. I wasn't worried about keeping my team alive. I'd made the money. I could finally be with my wife. I could relax. I could watch my kids grow up. I could be on the telly. I could play the drums. Like he said, those were the best of days. And the final sort of things we spoke about, because I kind of had a sense that I thought I'd see him again, but maybe not many times. And I said, how are you doing? He said, I do feel old. He said, and if there's one rule I've always had, don't let the old man in. And he looked kind of a bit, he did look his age at that point, but that phrase, don't let the old man in, I think is an important one. I was asking him how his recent illness and diagnosis has changed the way he sees the world. And he just said, MMTT, more money than time. He said, for years I thought I should buy these things or own these extravagant, outlandish, prizes of success. He said, now I realise none of that matters. He said, I'm not interested at all in buying things. What I'm interested in is experiences, is seeing people, is being with you, being with my family. So more money than time, I think, is really important. Never let the old man in. And I think that I always thought that in life there was people that really understood what they were doing, and there was people that didn't, and those that knew what they were doing were always going to be successful. And I love to think that I said to him, how did you get so successful in Formula One? I said to him at this dinner, and he said, I have no idea. He said, what you have to remember is I was making it all up. And I thought, what a relief, because I think all of us feel like we're making it all up. And he felt exactly the same. And I think the testament to him and his life is those 4 kids, his incredible wife, Marie, and the outpouring of love that we've seen over the last 12 hours or so. So many photos, videos, like he just lived it. And I honestly, Damian, like that is how I want to be. Like, I want to be him.
And if you could say one last message to him, what would that be?
I think I would just say thank you for being so nice. Looking after me, looking after Harriet. And I would say I'm glad that when the end came, it was swift. And I had a nice message from one of his children saying, look, he's out of pain and I'm sure he's causing complete chaos up there. And that's how I would just say to him, listen, man, you did it, you lived it. You know that beautiful phrase about I want to get every drop out of life.
Yeah.
The George Bernard Shaw quote, I want to be thoroughly used up when I'm gone. I think he was thoroughly used up. And I just have that memory of him playing the spoons. Like he's there, hopefully banging away on the spoons, and he deserves a rest.
Right, thank you for sharing this today. I know it's raw for you, but I think it's really beautiful that you've been able to take the time and remember the man he was and the impact and the lessons that he taught you as well. Well,
look, thank you. And the reason why it's important, I think, to do this, and I'm so grateful that you're happy to ask me these questions, is it's just to remind people that it is over so fast. I'm glad I had those final few opportunities to tell him I loved him, which I did. And in fact, when I left that meal, he went, as I was walking out, he goes, hey, I love you, brother. I think make sure you say that to people. Make sure you tell people how you feel about them, because you do not know when you won't get the chance. Thanks.
Oh, love you, mate.
And you. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, you're right.